All right, welcome to the Friday afternoon casual clubhouse edition of the podcast recording for The Spoon. We're actually recording this live after CES wrapped up, after Food Tech Live wrapped up. And with me, I have Jen Marston. Hey, Jen.
Hey, Mike.
And Chris Albrecht.
What's up, Mike?
Not much. It's been a big and busy week. We had the virtual version of CES and the first virtual version of Food Tech Live. And I wanted to get together and just kind of do a wrap up about what we saw this week, some of the favorite things you guys saw at Food Tech Live as well as CES. I also want to talk a little bit about the news, which I think we should start off with, Chris, because I think it's a fairly eventful thing that happened in the connected kitchen space. And that's the acquisition of June by Weber Grills.
Yeah.
Which you just published a piece on that today, really kind of writing about how it marks like one of the biggest consolidations of that smart oven space. June is like probably the most well-known countertop smart oven, and they were acquired this week by Weber.
Yeah, we don't know anything about the acquisition in terms of how much they paid. We know, I think it reported June raised $29 million at some point, so I don't know if their investors got their money back or not. But, there's a couple of things. One is just Weber and June had worked previously before on the Smart Hub Connect, which is a remote temperature probe. So you could cook, like you could turn any gas grill or any grilling experience into more of a guided cooking thing. So you could throw a steak on there and the June OS would guide you through cooking that steak. They also work together on the Smoke Fire pellet grill. So kind of the immediate thought is there are two things. One is you're going to see probably a lot more I would hope, precision automated algorithmic cooking coming to your grill outside, thanks to more deeper June integration into Weber products, but then also a bigger sales network for June, right? June was a startup and it was striking its own deals and selling direct online, but now it'll have Weber's sort of retail presence and ability to get out there and open up new sales channels for its countertop smart oven. But as you said, like this was the smart oven space, the smart countertop oven space really isn't that old, right? Like it kicks off with June in December of 2016, which even though it feels like 5 billion years ago, like it was only, 4 years ago. And in that time, now Weber acquired June and Brava was acquired by Middleby last year. Right. So that's two of the four main countertop oven players, smart oven players who were already gobbled up. And if you count Innova, which had already been acquired by Electrolux, and that's 3 out of the 5. Right. So because Innova just came out with its smart oven. So, what you're seeing is consolidation. And then you'll probably see that technology just built into bigger appliances that are built into people's homes.
Yeah, I think you're right in that you're starting to see consolidation. A couple other thoughts is, of the three that are kind of probably that you named, Innova, the steam oven, the most recent one, I think is probably doing the best. They keep selling it out. You can't even buy it right now. And it's probably a result of the fact that Innova has pretty good name recognition as well as a built-in audience with its sous vide equipment. Yeah, you're right. It's also not very old industry. You saw Whirlpool dabble in the space with their smart oven, but they basically did that as an experiment and they end-of-lifed it late last year and try to sell out all their inventory. So it is an interesting space. Who else is out there? We have Tavala, and we also have Suvie, Suvie.
Yeah, and as I was writing my piece today, which sort of looks at the broader market, like you have to, how are you defining it, right? Because I think Breville makes kind of a smarter toaster oven. So there are a lot of those type of appliances that are like high-end countertop ovens, but they aren't the same. Like they didn't come out of the gate as smart ovens. But of the ones, Suvie is another one, which, as you pointed out, builds itself as more of a kitchen robot. It chills your food until it's ready to cook. Suvie and Tavala are more closely tied with food delivery too, right? Like you get meal plans. The Suvie in particular, which I know they say cooks anything, but like it's going to work best if you subscribe to the sous vide meal plan because it's the way it's constructed and what it cooks. And then, Tavala has its own meal plans and its own smart oven. And then Tavala is actually the cheapest of the smart ovens, coming in at like $300.
I always thought, like, if you look at June's history, they came out of the gate really trying to be almost like the Apple of the connected kitchen.
Oh yeah.
Not that surprising. Not that surprising given the founder's history. Nikhil actually was one of the key designers of the early iPhone around the photography and the imaging. But I always thought it was a smart move when they started to basically view their technology as a platform that other folks can use. So when they announced the Weber News back, was it a couple years ago now? I thought that was always a good move for them.
Well, what's interesting, so when the first June oven came out, it was like it's like the Tesla, right? Like it was $1,500. And the second gen, that price dropped down to like 700. I think I picked mine up for around 600 because they had a deal going. But what's interesting to me too is that they didn't quite turn it into the platform that that I thought they would, right? Like a few years ago, they added a dedicated Whole Foods button, right? So you could, and if for anybody who has a June, or if you don't, like you can scroll through the touchpad, through the touchscreen, and you can get there's a Whole Foods button where it lists a bunch of Whole Foods, and it'll automatically cook those foods. You just say, hey, this is asparagus pizza or whatever. And if it's in the menu, you push it, and then it'll run through an automated cook program that cooks that thing, without you having to do anything. And that's, it's that automated cooking is what I really like, right? Like, so one of the things, anyway, so just to finish that point, is when I spoke with Matt Van Horn, the CEO, about that earlier, I was like, oh, you're adding a button. This now becomes more like an iPhone. And he just kind of smiley faced emoji'd me because, the idea being that you could then like, well, here's a Trader Joe's button, right? And here's a Safeway button, right? Like you could, or any other kind of a Wolfgang Puck button, but that never really materialized. So I don't know if that was just sort of focusing on their core competencies. But to sort of like, we were talking about the Innova oven. One of the things that I struggle is that's not a word. I don't struggle with this. This is a very high-end problem, but like, I love my June oven. Like we seriously use it every single day in my house because my son can use it because he doesn't have to, he can tell it, hey, I'm reheating pizza. Right. And just a couple of taps and it's all done, and it shuts off automatically. So no one has to worry about the oven being left on or anything like that. And I use it because for things like salmon and fish, because it cooks it perfectly. Like it does a really phenomenal job of cooking. But the one thing it doesn't have that Innova has is that steam oven. That steam oven is like super alluring. Scott Heimendinger does a really good job. He was talking about it at our Food Tech Live event this week, and you're like, oh, do I need a steam oven?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the reasons that June possibly struggled and never broke through as a high volume sales unit was it never really brought an additional cooking capability. All the additional features were around digital power technology, like, okay, identifying the food. But I think if we've learned anything over the past couple of years is if you bring something like steam, which really is something that is desirable, most people don't already have in their kitchen.
What's funny about the identification thing, like it's a bell and whistle, like when I first got the June, I was like, oh, I can put in a chicken breast and it knows that it's a chicken breast and it'll cook it automatically. And then after a while, I was like, well, I don't really need that, right? Like, because they have a menu that's pretty easy to follow. So, it takes a couple of taps for me to go like, yeah, this is a chicken breast. You know what I mean? Like, it's not the identification. I was never trying to stump it or like, I knew what I was putting into the oven. I didn't necessarily need June to tell me what I was, use machine learning and computer vision to figure it out.
And you mentioned, Chris, that Scott Heimendinger and the Nova folks were showing off the new precision oven at Food Tech Live. So let's talk about that. Food Tech Live was this week. It was virtual, as well was CES. It was the first time both had gone virtual. And we had about 30 companies showing off products at Food Tech Live. One of them was Nova, but also one of them, which is what I would pretty much consider the opposite of the Nova oven or the June oven, is in the Bon Bowl gen, which you interviewed Mike Kubota, the CEO of Bon Bowl, and your enthusiasm for the product was showing through.
Was it?
Which isn't a bad thing. It isn't a bad thing. I actually kind of admire like something like the Bon Bowl in that it's so simple and it's not pretending to be anything else, right?
Yeah, that was one of his points at the event, actually, was that simplicity. I mean, all it is an induction cooktop with a bowl. You put 5 ingredients or less in typically and heat it. And it's single serving meals. Yeah. He was very explicit when we talked at the event that simplicity was very much a part of the plan from the get-go, which I thought, we mentioned it was just interesting. We are in an age where, guided cooking and very sophisticated machines like June or the Anova that can do so much for you. And here you've got, over on the other side of the spectrum, this teeny tiny little cooktop that, you can throw some stuff into and heat for a single person, which also has its own particular audience, I think.
Chris, what were some of your favorite things you saw at Food Tech Live?
So I had the benefit of talking with, one is the one talk I didn't get to have was the Yokai Express Takumi. I know it's a single use device, but it's a countertop device used to reheat Yokai's ramen. And I am really excited for that. Yokai's ramen is delicious. And as they partner with other ramen companies, that's only going to get more delicious. And the thought of having getting frozen ramen delivered to my house, keeping it in the freezer, and then just on a cold Pacific Northwest afternoon, sticking it in the Takumi, and 3 minutes later having piping hot, delicious ramen is oh yeah, that's pretty great. That is, that's phenomenal. And the other thing, this isn't, one of the things I was interested in is, I wrote about this, but Ember Ember makes temperature controlled coffee mugs. So you can use your phone to set a precise temperature and keep the mug will stay at that temperature. So they have this really interesting heating and cooling technology. And they're getting into the packaging business, which is really interesting if they can keep things cold enough. Because if you think about, I'm getting a Crowd Cow delivery today. So that means that I'm going to get a giant box filled with padding and filled with dry ice. That's just a lot of waste generated for, the salmon and chicken that I'm getting. And if they can create this box would be reusable. So you could ship it, keep it at the cold chain, keep it, the same temperature going through, and then send the box back and have it be reused, which I think is a really exciting and important development if it works as promised.
We also had Coco Terra at Food Tech Live. They were written up in an article today on the IEEE Spectrum. And it was one of the favorite things that this particular author saw. I don't have her name in front of me. And I actually had a chance to interview Nate Saul, the CEO of Coco Terra. I've been excited about this chocolate maker for some time. It's basically a home chocolate maker that makes chocolate directly from nibs and sugar and pretty much almost bean to bar. You can't quite seem to say bean to bar if it actually uses nibs, but it's still pretty cool. I feel like chocolate making in the home is one of those categories that could maybe break out if you automate it and make it easy enough. Because quite honestly, right now it's actually not that easy to make real chocolate in the home. I can see, Jen, you being someone who maybe would make chocolate.
I got very excited watching your interview with Coco Terra, actually. Yeah. I think, I don't know. Chocolate's one of those things where it's almost, even for DIY me, it seems almost a little bit insurmountable. But so if certain parts of it were automated, I would totally do something like that.
Yeah, it's not like you could just take off-the-shelf stuff in your home and make chocolate from the bean, because you do need some special equipment. Well, the fact that go ahead.
Chocolate's also not like cooking in the sense that a lot of, cooking, you're making a sauce, just throw some stuff in here and a handful of that there and experiment. You have to be much more precise with things like chocolate. Like it's a little bit more chemistry than it is experimenting. So that alone makes it a little bit more difficult. So I feel like tech that can sort of assist people with getting that precision is actually really cool in this case.
That was one thing Heston showed off too, right? The Heston smart cooking system has a new temperature probe for its. And one of the express uses they said was for making candy. And so this would help people, not burn your caramel or whatever as you are making your homegrown candy.
To your point, Chris, going back to the June, the fact that they never really became as adventurous in expanding, I feel like that's one of the powers of digital powered cooking technology, IoT powered cooking, like the Heston. The fact that they added this temperature probe, and hey, now we're basically adding a software upgrade or whatever, a new feature that you can actually do candy. I think that's kind of one of the things. Field upgrades to do new things is one of the powers of it.
Yeah, I mean the ability for Heston in particular, but again, Heston is backed. What, GE? Who is Heston is
Heston's a part of the broader Meyer cooking empire, which is one of the large cookware companies.
Yeah, so they've also got a sort of an expansive network and deep pockets to sort of sustain themselves. But the Heston system it's a smart pan and an induction cooktop, and now this probe, right? And the idea being that all these things talk to each other, and you could add, so you could add other elements to it. And the June, not to sound pejorative, but like the June at the end of the day is an oven. That's all it's ever going to be. It's not you can't make candy in a June. You can't add some different hardware to it, because all it can do is just change the way it algorithmically cooks. It can change the way it manipulates the heating elements, but it can't fundamentally change the fact that it is an oven.
So you're not going to try jailbreaking your June oven anytime soon?
No, I am not going to do that. I know I said this before, but I really am like, ooh, the thing holding me back from like the Innova, switching over to like the Innova, because the way they sell, because the Innova cooks with steam, right? So you get sous vide cooking plus like searing. So you could sous vide a whole chicken and then get it, crispy or whatever, because it'll switch from wet heat to dry heat. But it doesn't have sort of just the meat and potatoes sort of basics yet. Like I can't just put in a chicken breast and go like, hey, cook this chicken breast, which is what I need, right? Like I need to be able to put it in a cod and go cook this cod, because I don't know how to cook a cod. I'm not a very good cook and I get nervous. And so especially with like meats, I'm like, oh, I don't want to get anybody sick. So I'll overcook it and turn it to leather. And the June takes care of all that, right? You just stick the probe in and go like, this is a chicken, cook the chicken, or this is, an Arctic char, or whatever it is, whatever kind of fish. And it does it automatically. So that's the kind of thing that I'm looking for. But the Innovas right now is like more of a really, like it's got to be, it's like a salt encrusted salmon with chimichurri sauce is the recipe that they give to you. It's like, well, I don't need all of that. I just need the basics. Just cook the salmon for me. That's it. That's all I want you to do.
It sounds like you actually really want a fully automated cooking robot. Speaking of which, looking at CES, we saw a lot of food robots. Not a lot. We saw some. Because it was virtual, we probably didn't see much as we normally would. And one of the ones showing off this year at virtual CES was the Molly, which we wrote about, I think it was just a few weeks ago, Chris, and that they were basically announcing in advance of CES that they were going on sale. If anyone is not familiar with the Molly robotic food system, this is a fully robotic food system with articulating arms that has been kind of one of the buzzy, I wouldn't say buzzy, but more one of the, if you ever Google cooking robot, usually Molly's at the top, because they showcased this thing, I think back in 2015. And it was kind of crazy back then, right? Like these robotic arms before we ever saw like a lot of the other restaurant robotics. The Molly robot was out there, at least in concept, and they're finally getting ready to sell. And they were showing it off at CES. And Chris, it only is going to set you back about $300,000 if you want one.
Oh yeah, and you need to basically re-architect your kitchen, right? Like you can't just, they're not just bolting two arms on underneath your cabinets and calling it a day, right? Like no, it's a whole system with special cookware and utensils and storage and things that slide out and cleaning and all this stuff, right? So, it's definitely for I will not be getting a Molly probably in my lifetime, just based on its current projections. Because it's a ton of money, and you really do need to you would have to like knock a wall out of your kitchen and rebuild it from the ground up to install the Molly, is what it feels like.
Is the point of it to replace your kitchen, or it would just be another appliance?
Oh, no, it is like, it's not just an appliance. Literally, it's like a special refrigerator, like it's refrigerated compartments. And then you identify with special storage things. So you identify like, okay, the eggs are here, and then the flour is here. And then it puts it in these different temperature controlled things. And the arm grabs it and pours it out. And grabs the spatula, and then the arm, stirs it in a special pan. Like it is a full system. It is like the house of tomorrow kind of thing. But on a smaller scale, it was fun seeing the Oliver show off at FTL this week with its its pods of food being dispensed and being cooked.
It's such a contrast, right? You see the full spectrum of food robotics. You see these countertop food robot single pot cooking machines like the the Oliver, like the Nimble, which was also on display. There's another one at CES where you basically put a bunch of food in a pod and it stirs it and it heats it. And it's a fairly, it does automate a lot of it. Some of it you still have to do. I think, for example, with the Oliver, you have to actually chop up the vegetables and put it in their pods, and then it dispenses that in the oil and cooks it. Contrast that with, back to your question, Jen, the Moly. It is one of these full robotic systems that it's taking the ingredients out of the fridge. It's putting it back. It's actually supposedly, it apparently cleans dishes as well. So it's kind of very much the futuristic Jetsons do everything cooking robot versus like the Nimble or the Oliver, which sits on your countertop and automates a good chunk of it. Call it the CEO of Elsa Labs, which is the creator of Oliver, basically calls it unattended cooking. So if you look at like Thermomix, for example, they call it guided cooking, right? A lot of it is done and you go step by step and you have accompanying guidance with you. What the Oliver wants to do is basically unattended cooking, where you basically have all the ingredients. You can push go from an app and, in an hour you have a fully cooked meal. So I think you could kind of see this, the full spectrum of cooking automation if you go from the Thermomix to the Oliver all the way up to the Moly.
Yeah, I mean, Jen, just so to give you a sense, like the Moly comes with a built-in protective screen that slides down so that humans don't get hurt by the cooking robot.
Okay. So they mean business. Yeah. Okay. So we're just going to eventually see ghost kitchens manned by Moly.
It's funny you should mention
Eats,
that.
right? Chris, isn't Robo Eats something that may actually be more of a ghost kitchen robot?
Yeah, I wrote about a company today called Robo Eats, and it's a kiosk. It's about 200 square feet, I think, if I recall correctly. And it's an articulating arm that can serve up to like 1,000 different types of meals. The Robo Eats contains 110 different ingredients. And this arm goes through, picks you order something, you customize it. You can say, I want let's just say a beef broccoli, right? And it grabs all the ingredients, throws it in an induction cooker, cooks it up, and then plates it and sticks it in a cubby for you to pick it up. And it can do a meal like every 30 seconds once it's like up and going. And that's not, what's funny is like, that's just the latest in a string of fully automated kitchens. We've also got YPC Technologies, which making one, Hyper, Karakuri over in England. Like ghost kitchens are going to get automated real quick with this. And these systems are like fully autonomous. You only need a person to, drop in new ingredients as it runs out.
Well, yeah, I know a lot of the folks who displayed at Food Tech Live, and a lot of it's more consumer connected kitchen, but one thing that I noticed throughout the day, to Mike's point about the range of different robotics in particular, is just the possibilities we now have for making the cooking process more efficient, which like right now, that is the sort of tagline in the back of house space of the restaurant industry is, how do we make it more efficient? How do we make it faster without completely sacrificing quality of food and things like that? So I wouldn't be surprised if we see a lot of similar concepts come into ghost kitchens and even just regular old restaurant back of houses, maybe sooner than we might have thought a year ago.
Yeah, well, COVID is also pushing that, right? Like, because robots can free up space in a kitchen so you don't have a bunch of people crowded around the same area.
Just get the Mole, connect one of those conveyor belts that Burger King's doing to it, and put it in a rover bot,
George
and off
Jetson.
you go.
Full robotics, cooking robotics was not the only thing that was on display at CES. We actually didn't have this one at Food Tech Live. Is the Cold Snap countertop ice cream freezer. I don't know if any of you saw that. It was one of the products that has been written up by quite a bit, and it's basically a pod-based ice cream maker. So basically is about $2.50 per serving, single serving pods. And it's interesting in that, like, it makes me wonder if people will want this type of thing, but I don't know.
Isn't it for offices? Is the Cold Snap? I remember reading about that. I couldn't tell if it was a home device. I can't remember if it's a home device or for offices.
Everything I'm seeing has pictures of like kids sitting in their homes. So I think it's actually a consumer device.
Okay.
But it did win a CES Innovation Award, but I think that's probably just because everyone likes ice cream and it just kind of had that internal bias built in.
Well, sure.
But I mean, who doesn't like ice cream? So it's kind of a Keurig for ice cream type of concept. So that was one. Another thing we had at our event was called, and unfortunately the AV didn't come through when we were interviewing the founder, Patrick, but it was called The Weapon.
Oh, yeah.
It's either the best name of all time or the worst name of all time, The Weapon. And I think the problem with the name of the Weapon is it doesn't convey what it does. It's a cold drink dispenser, refrigerated canned drink dispenser.
Well,
and
it's a can-shaped cold can drink dispenser, right? So it's like a can within it. It's like the old Beavis and Butthead. It's a butt-shaped tattoo of a butt on a butt. Like it is a can-shaped cold can dispenser.
It was beverage automation inception. And the founder is a guy by the name of Patrick. He was actually coming to us from South Africa. I think it's the first time we ever had a founder doing one of our events from South Africa. So that was cool. But yeah, it's one of these things. It's one of those products that isn't quite ready for market. He's still working on it. But I think, Chris, you wanted one, though. If you could put your cold LaCroix in there, you'd do it, right?
Well, yes, but I'm a child, So the idea of, putting a giant silver can in my living room or den, and anytime myself or my son wants a cold drink, having it dispensed out of a giant can, well, I mean, that's just fun. I mean, that's really just fun. What I love is in the ad, if you watch the video, like you find it online at The Weapon. And at the very end of the video, they're like, remember, it's not my weapon, it's the weapon. And I was like, what are you talking about? Why does that?
I feel like it could have been a good tagline, but he just didn't quite get it right.
What does that matter? It's not your, okay, got it. Thanks.
No, but it was a kind of a fun product. But I will say, just by virtue of the fact that it's CES and Food Tech Live, we had a lot of gadgets. But because Food Tech Live was a full day, we also had some interesting sessions. And it wasn't just hardware. We had a few folks doing things like talking about things like culture meat. And Jen, you had a panel with Benjamin Abog, the CEO of Higher Steaks, which makes basically cultured whole cut steak. And we also had the founder of BioMilk, which is basically doing cell ag based biomilk. And how did that panel go?
It went really well. I mean, it may not be as fun as a giant can in your living room like Chris likes, but no, it.
Yeah, I'm not going to weigh in on whether cell cultured breast milk is more fun than a giant can in my living room. That's a recipe.
I mean,
for disaster.
we could debate the rest of the afternoon.
Actually, no.
Yeah, I think one will have a bigger societal impact. Yeah. That's probably the breast milk one. I just think culture meat is actually such a big deal, and just cell ag based food. And I think this panel showed the diversity of it, right? Whole cut steak, breast milk replacement. There's just so much happening in the space.
Yeah, I think the panel really surfaced a few really important things. A huge one of which was the diversity, not just of what we can make in a lab right now in terms of alternative protein, but also founders. I mean, it was a panel of all women, which I thought was fantastic. It's also, founders of these cell-based protein companies are also, we're starting to see they're coming from different backgrounds. It's not just Ivy League science backgrounds, that sort of thing. It's a little bit more diverse in that respect as well. I think a couple really big points from the panel were, one is that we're sort of past this point where, meat or breast milk grown in a lab, that's science fiction. I don't think a lot of people believe that now. I think it's actually, this is a viable part of our future food system. I think that's a generally accepted idea at this point, which leads us to, okay, now we need to start asking some different questions. Not is this possible, but how do we make it possible? And I think Benjamina and Michelle on the panel offered up a lot of really good things that folks need to be talking about right now, which is, how do you, for example, ensure quality control once you start scaling and you're dealing with these huge batches outside of a lab. It kind of goes back to something we talk a lot about here at The Spoon, which is this huge difference between there being a successful prototype in the lab and a successful product that is out there available for consumers. And cell-based protein is not at that point yet, but I think one thing this panel really underscored was that it's well on its way to getting there, even if it's going to be a few more years until we hit that point.
Yeah, the cell cultured milk is really fast. I don't know if you touched on it, but they were talking, biomilk in particular, as they roll out, will do like biopsies of women to create customized cultured milk. And you can even get it from men, right? So you could have completely tailored, customized milk from your parents, grown in a lab and fed to your baby.
Yeah, she touched on that a little bit, which I thought was the whole cultured breast milk concept, I think, is just one of the most fascinating in the alt protein space, just because it could make such a huge impact for so many people on the planet.
Right. And it's such a fundamental part of a person's development in life that making sure you get it right, having all those micronutrients that you need at that stage, and personalizing, which is crazy. Like, Chris, I didn't even know that you can actually take some of the father's cells or whatever. I don't even know how it's possible, but that's fascinating to me. But the whole personalization angle is another part that came up during the panel I ran on 3D food printing, which was an interesting thing. We had that after the first thing in the morning. In the first thing in the morning, we actually went to Spain virtually and watched Giuseppe Schianti actually 3D printed meat and show us an example of printing some of the ultimate. Basically, he's combining plant-based as well as cellular agriculture and doing this. He's doing the scaffolding and plant-based, and then using a lab to develop basically cellular agriculture-based meat. And I thought that was an interesting combo, and it shows you how kind of these two worlds are coming together.
Yeah, no, the 3D, I mean, as you've written about before too, like that's just because they're getting like industrial scale, or they're getting closer to commercial scale sort of 3D printing meat, and it's crazy because it's a plant scaffolding with cell cultured meat, protein layered on top of it. Like it's really accelerating.
And, even like higher stakes, they're pretty clear about the fact that they need to use some plant-based hybrid ingredients as well to get their product to market. Because the thing is, like doing like a 3D printed steak with the fat and the muscle tissue and all the protein, that's going to be a while. But if you could do part of it and use something like plant-based scaffolding or some components of plant-based derived fat or whatever, that's kind of how we're going to get there. And so it's just interesting to have these conversations because all these different components are coming together, whether that's 3D food printing or the plant-based meat stuff, the cell ag stuff, all is intersecting to make this future food world possible. And so it was fun talking with a bunch of these folks. Chris, you had a conversation on more of what's happening today, or at least in the near future, with Scott Heimendinger and some other folks about the future of the consumer kitchen. How did that go?
It went really well, right? Like obviously the pandemic is sort of looming over all the discussion on what the future of the kitchen looked like. But one of the takeaways was like we had Bahubali Shetty of Clove, and they do voice interactions. You get recipes, voice guided recipe kinds of things. And one of the things that came up was just the idea of sort of a multimodal kitchen, right? Like voice doesn't work well for everything. Sometimes I want to see how something is done, right? So there are going to be visual elements, and sometimes my hands are going to be dirty. So I can't touch the controls of like an expensive consumer electronics device. So I want to use gestures, right? If I want to pause something or have it fast forward. And then I want my kitchen, I may want my kitchen appliances to talk to one another. So I can start a recipe and it'll tell, whatever brain is guiding me through the recipe will tell the oven to preheat at the right time and then guide the oven as it's cooking, to make sure that the temperatures are kept correctly. So our kitchen is going to transform into, right now it's very touch based and with some voice with, Amazon's Echo and Google's Assistant. But we're going to see that transform, especially as you see things like GE employing, really pushing the big screen in the kitchen for videos and communicating. That will then explore, get further out and embedded more deeply into all of the devices to where they're all talking with each other and we're all got different inputs depending on what we need. So, the kitchen is ripe for sort of a change in the way we interface with it.
And those are three great panels, right? Three different perspectives. Scott Heimendinger, of course, is great because he's there at the early days of sous vide. Bahubali, which is basically doing voice assistance. And then you also had a real chef in Sylvia. So she's like one of the most. She was a contestant on Iron Chef. She may have won Iron Chef. So it was a great.
It was
mixing. Chopped. Was it Chopped? Okay.
Yeah, I think
did she win?
She's a two-time winner.
Two-time winner, and I'm getting
two-time winner of Chopped.
So that was a great mix. So good mix. But I think overall, I'd love to get your thoughts, Chris. You've been to CES a number of times. Jen, it's been a while since you've been, but going purely digital, I feel like it didn't quite have as much impact. I feel like Food Tech Live was great because we brought all these folks together. We were actually
put it on.
That was our event. I know. Food Tech, but CES itself, I feel like it was really hard for me to navigate. I just feel like CES isn't quite the same unless you're in Vegas.
Well, CES is overwhelming in person, right? But at least then I have like a direction to go. I can walk to the South Hall or, ride the monorail, whatever it is. Like I can start at one end of a hall and walk to the other. And I'm going to be assaulted by a billion different things, but at least there's some order to it, right? And when you put it all online, it just becomes, you just get this like option paralysis. Like I don't know where to start yet, right?
Yeah.
Like a million different booths to wander through and have those casual discoveries or kind of those hidden gems you find all goes down to like one search bar. So I'm sitting at the CS website and I'm entering keywords. Isn't quite the same as just stumbling through Vegas, maybe with a little bit of a hangover and finding a cool cooking robot, which is always fun.
Yeah. And it's also like when you're walking through, right? Like, so if you were to type in refrigerator, right? Like you're going to get 1,000 different results of people selling like small refrigerators, vintage looking refrigerators, or, refrigerators built into shoes or whatever it is. Right. And when you're walking past it, you can go like, I don't need to see that. But when because you can visually go like, that's not in our wheelhouse. That's not anything that we cover. But when it's all online, it's just sort of a list. You're like, oh, I don't know. Where do I start?
And there's not this sensory experience, right? One of the things I remember about the bread bot, which I think debuted in the 2019 CES, was just the smell of fresh bread wafting through the halls. It was just like a very powerful draw. You just had all these people crowding around the bread bot, in part because who doesn't love the smell of baked bread? And you don't quite get that with the internet.
Yet.
Not yet. That'll be next year. So, but hey, this has been a lot of fun. This is actually our first time we've done a podcast while also doing it in the Clubhouse. Those folks who are listening in, thank you for joining us. We appreciate it. We'll see if we can maybe do this again in the future. We're just experimenting here, but it was fun talking with you guys about what's happening at CES, what happened to Food Tech Live, and what happened with June and that acquisition. So thank you guys.
Super fun.
All right.